Alright, should be making a video. Video I'm making for the second time. Great video. I mean, it's like an hour and a half long. Just great jokes. Just never going to recapture that one again. Anyway, it's always that. It's the liability of videography. It's the occasional fuck up. So I made the mistake of loading Audacity onto the computer in between making videos, and it screwed up all the sound settings, so there was no sound on the video. I was like, oh fuck. So anyway, so here, not doing it again. So it'll be comments in half a day, and just disappointing. Alright, I have a simple question. How can forces not interact with each other when they are free traveling through space, but when they hit encounter matter, they are able to change direction 90 degrees? Explained this before. I'm not saying they don't interact. I'm saying their interactions are moot. They can't mean anything. So it's like the head-on thing, right? If it's purely kinetic, and black hits black, there'll be a black leaving and a black leaving. So hitting will look exactly the same as missing. So the universe will look exactly the same when the same color stuff hits. Now, I would argue that the reason why the black and red don't hit is because in the natural state they're not on the same plane, so they don't interact. But a matter bit allows them to interact, and that is to change their direction. So they still stay on the wrong plane, but they exchange direction. So the matter bit interprets their interaction. So that interaction probably might have 3 or 5 stages to it. First, say you got a black bit, the red bit will go in, alright, and it interacts, and it's going to try to cause momentum. But that interaction causes a secondary reaction with another red bit, and then another cascade of things happen, and the end result is the red bit going this way leaves this way, and a black bit going this way leaves that way. So the two interactions blend into each other, and they kind of exchange their interaction. So you can sort of get that, right? A black bit comes in and interacts and leaves, and the red bit leaves. Neither one stays in, but you essentially have two interactions that blend into each other and cause the effect. If, let's say, the black force hits a matter bit that is opposite it, as far as I can understand from your model, well, I guess that was the rest of your sentence, but it was messed up with this, made it into a link. As far as I can understand from your model of reality, matter is just trapped force. I don't, what matter is, obviously, is a conduit. So force interacts, it hits it, and the matter moves. So how it collects that motion, again, I said you could just think of it as Velcro. You can think of it as a certain capacity, and that's its capacity. It can exchange, it can make 500 exchanges, it can make 1,000,000, it can make 5. I don't know how many, I don't know what extent. It seems clear that electrons are moved pretty substantially by single photons. So they can't collect too many. It seems kind of obvious, because the momentum, electrons don't get up to the speed of light immediately, but they can get up to the speed of light quickly. Alright, close to, just trapped force, a school of fish as you often call it. But how comes that forces are not interacting in open space? Again, I'm not saying they're not interacting, I'm just saying all the interactions would be imperceptible, in that they couldn't change the universe any. But when they hit matter, they are able to interact, because the matter delays the interaction, essentially, right? I mean, the thing's going this way, the matter collects it, moves much slower, and then the thing's released. So it's obviously causing a disruption in the form of how the force would interact in the universe. Stuff that was going someplace doesn't get where it was going, as I often say. You call it. But how comes the force interacting with space, but the matter is able to interact? Well, that's the same question as before, and I think I've answered it. Don't get me wrong, I like your model. It looks consistent to me, and I think it will be a very reliable model over reality. I should, like, over time, maybe. when it will be complete. Well, like I said, I think it's so much more complete than theirs. All they say is bent space and virtual photon and multi-dimensions and dark matter and, wooey made-up crap. I don't know if I understand all wrong, but I think in order to make a complete theory, you need to model the interaction of the force bits with matter bits a little bit more deeply. I don't think I need to at all. I mean, it's a simple process. What more do you need to know? It's a dog. It's not a cat. I mean, I've given you a pretty complete explanation. There's only 4 little processes that take place, 4 kinds of interactions, essentially. So what more detail do you need? I mean, I'm supposed to have, whatever, supervision. I got some sort of ability to look inside of atoms and see inside of electrons. No one's going to be able to do that. So I don't know what that information I don't know what good that information will be to you. It does a certain little thing. The same thing it does is really simple. I mean, I can draw you the arrows. It's so simple. This is not a critique or trolling, just a suggestion that may be in the form of a lack of understanding of your model. Well, I just don't understand how you, you seem to get some of it, so fine. But I don't understand why you need to know how the electron makes the photon change its direction. How does that help you any? I don't see how it's going to help you any. There's a circumstance where the electron collects the momentum. That's when the same force hits it. When the opposite force hits it, it doesn't collect the momentum. It exchanges 2 interactions and releases the energy free again, just in opposite directions from which it was moving, not 90-degree different in the directions. Please correct me if I'm wrong and keep up the good work. Well, I think you're wrong to expect one person for 7 years to create a theory, okay, that in some way is going to provide you. I mean, you have no expectations for their theory, right? You demand no details, and yet you want insanely, you want to know how many hairs are on a dog or something. And you're not even asking these other people to make a distinction between a dog and a wildebeest. They can just make up anything. Well, anyway, I think your standards are a little bit inconsistent. In the middle of this video, at about 22 minutes, you talk about the scientists' desire to have light expressed as a wave. Well, it seems obviously they have a bias, an insane bias, where they even call formulas wave formulas, when they're clearly, you might be able to call them phase formulas, right? Because bullets can have a phase, lots of things that aren't waves can have phases. So you could call it a phase formula if you were honest. And realistically, it's an angle formula. But anyway, this is true. It is because there are 2 equations that work for calculating light that are known. That's just wrong. There's not 2 equations for calculating the same things. So there's 2 kinds of experiments. You can try to measure the momentum or the power of a photon, and that's one circumstance where it ends up being quantized and it ends up not being wavy. And the other circumstance is where you're measuring direction of a photon, and that's when things get loopy. So I don't see any consistency. The 2 things they're calculating are completely different. There's not 2 formulas that work to answer the same question. Like they're known in the same situations, one equation will work, and in other situations the other will work. Exactly, they're completely different formalizations. So they have nothing in common as formulas. So I don't see how this justifies them having a wave bias. Clearly, if they paid attention to the momentum of photons, they wouldn't see any waveness to it. But not both at the same time. One equation assumes light as a particle and the other assumes that light is a wave. So again, why their bias for wavicles? Most experiments aren't as precise as people assume. I know that's true. My job involves me checking the precision with which chemical reactions in metals occur, and the variance, even when the conditions are nearly identical in one experiment to the next, are significant, sometimes off by 15 or 20%. My father did a lot of metallurgy on his job. Tungsten, though, kind of hard to work with. So yeah, it's a you have a process, and the process only works 50% of the time, and that's with scientists. You know, they just can't guarantee it. I guess this car must not work. I guess his car must not work. It's all based on arbitrary declarations. So I think he's talking about the dissident science guy. Should always make things explicit about who you're talking about, just to avoid any confusion. So anyway, off to the day. And this is a really dumb video. Now I hadn't, you know, the first time I played it, I hadn't heard the video, so I just stopped at the point where he said DraftScience is wrong about something, and that always triggers me. Because compared to him, I'm right all the time. You know, you can't even see my wrongnesses because his flaws are so glaring. So anyway, so this gets into these idiotic arguments about quantum mechanics, really, because they're not even scientific arguments about interpretations and all that kind of crap. That's not science anyway. They're just making all that crap up. So that's not really the core thing here. And so the real controversy is that the Feynman-Susskind types distance themselves from Huygens, wave interference. They don't really care about all these mechanical explanations because they think they're kind of rubbish. And they're basically just saying the universe has this probability thing, and it's no point in looking for the cause because we're smart, we can't find it, therefore there can't be one. And the universe just does this. The universe is too complicated, and the universe is complicated, and it has these phenomena that are just beyond our capacity to understand because it's some super dimension that's doing it, or some invisible homunculus, and so there's no point in looking because he's invisible, we'll never see him. It's some kind of bullshit like that. Feynman just essentially said, look, it's random, the universe is random, deal with it, accept it, and just move on. Don't pretend to play with cause. And that was a stupid attitude, in my opinion. Very ignorant. Very pretentious. Because all he was really saying was, gee, I tried to figure it out, and I couldn't do it, so you imbeciles can't have it. You don't have any hope. If I can't, the great Feynman can't do it, you assholes aren't going to be able to do it. That was basically all he's saying. That's all Susskind is saying. And Susskind is famous for this, like I said, jargon all over the place. This holographic, woo-wee nonsense information theory, just complete crap. I mean, there's no way the information's anywhere. You could never get the information. You'd have to go all the way back in time to get it. You'd have to have a videotape or a model that tracked everything so you could go back in time and figure out this history. So it's just a pile of shit. There is no information anywhere. The information is lost because you can't go back in time, so forget it, it's gone. You could never, the context of the information is essentially, my information is written on him, it's written everywhere. You can't undo all the interactions, and there's no way you could follow any of them back, so what's the point of even talking about there being anything called information? There isn't any. Accessible. It's just bullshit theory. Then he uses anti-divergence instead of saying convergence, and this is a manipulator. Vectors, he uses the word vector for a stupid mathematical concept that just has nothing to do with an arrow pointing. You know, it's just horse shit.
And that is why I think DraftScience goes too far, is that there are these gentlemen, with the exception of Shakar, or the Yale professor. I think it's something like Shakar.
So he's saying these gentlemen, he means Susskind and Feynman types, who, you know, somehow accept or somehow are admitting that, yeah, all those explanations, those causes are just wooey bullshit. And, no, and the real truth is, we can't know. Some kind of horseshit like that. So just do the math. And the math, again, I'll say it overtly. I wish somebody give me a response. Do you mind giving me a response to this this point? The math is just a formalization of what they see. All of it is shitty in a lot of senses, but I mean, there's no mathematics that predicts. You know, when you rub the surface of glass and make it thinner and thinner, that the reflective index changes. It didn't predict that phenomenon. It's just predicting the outcome, which we can observe. Newton observed it first. He didn't write a formula for it first. He's observed it first. And the same is true with the two-slit experiment and the single-slit experiment. And you can see how broken the math is in a sense that they have to change the variables in the two different experiments to make the formula even work. But let's not pretend the formula is actually predicting something we didn't already know, or that the formula has any value whatsoever if we don't already know the answer to many elements of the probability. If we don't already know what we're talking about, glass surfaces or slits or electron spin or whatever, if we don't know what we're talking about, the formula doesn't mean anything. It's not universal. It's not some magical thing that does everything. It's just horseshit. Formulas are just a description of effects. What's your counter argument to that point? Mathematics just formalizes a description of effects. It does not predict anything that it didn't already know, that wasn't already known to write the formula. The formula was written because we saw the effects.
He is actually speaking in a lecture on relativity, and I thought he provides the best juxtaposition about the problems of reasoning about quantum mechanics between the things that are delivered by vector space qualities, that is, waves and negative entities.
So again, and all that crap doesn't have, as soon as you say this, yes, negative entities carried on photons, which is idiotic. So again, what does he use? He uses another metaphor, again, of a water wave. And so we're supposed to believe that light is like water, when we know light isn't like water. The pattern is similar, but we know the cause isn't the same, because we know water has friction, lots of reasons why water creates round waves and why those waves interfere with each other. We know that photons don't do that, so why are we pretending they do? Why are we pretending that two radar guns with no slit impediment are Heisenberging and Huygensing? We know they're not doing that, right? They can't possibly be Heisenberging and Huygening, so it's clearly individual photons interacting with other photons, which breaks the laws a little bit, right? Because there's no other experiment where we can get them to do that. How come we can't, just as a routine fact, get these things to interfere with each other? I mean, the bullshit is, to defend these guys who are just copping out. I mean, at least Professor Lewin has the guts to say Huygens and fight for it and defend it. These assholes are just saying, no bother, thinking about it. Causes don't matter. We have fun little formulas that figure out answers to questions nobody's asking. Nobody's asking the questions that these stupid formulas have answers to. So don't tell me they're doing anything legitimate, except talking out of their ass.
Negative entities that, when combined with their equivalent positive, cancel to zero. I would think a strong definition of something in reality would be that something that exists in reality can never be cancelled out.
Right. So we're back to this argument about the nature of energy and the fact that if two objects are moving and they stop, right, their movement has to leak out into the environment somewhere. That the force that was actually in them will be realized in the fact that they won't just hit each other and stop and everything will be just fine. That's not how it happens. If I have kinetic balls, that won't happen. The balls will bounce off of each other because they have to, because they still have energy. So the energy has to go somewhere. So if two waves cancel each other, well, what happened when that happened? So the water was moving and now the water stops moving. Well, the energy has to go somewhere. And how does it go there? And so again, to say that a photon's momentum can work that way, in my opinion, would be a little bit retarded.
Of course, it may be wrong, but that just means that the entire premise of there being a reality, in any sense as we see it, is wrong. But we're
right, well, that's what they're arguing, okay? They're arguing that reality is somehow fucked up because it's making this stupid, idiotic pattern. So these silly little experiments that create these little, tiny, insignificant phenomena that barely mean anything, they're going to build this whole theory of wacky universe out of that. Out of that little bit of evidence of oh, we don't understand, and now instead of just saying, well, maybe we ought to think about it a little harder, they sit there and create all of this bullshit. All of this whole wooey religion built out of that. Like there was a nice guy 2,000 years ago called Jeebus, and, they just turned it into a whole bullshit story. He walked on water and he made fishes and he did this and he healed the dead and he rose the whatever, the infirmed, and he did all this, walked on the water and then rose from the dead. Yeah, maybe none of that crap happened. Maybe this whole fucking religion is all just bullshit. You know, there was a Jesus. A guy.
Away from abandoning what appears before us.
So again, he premised, before he said I was wrong, he was basically just saying, well, as much as I critique these guys for being liars, they're at least honest enough to say they were liars. You know, and then he's going to go into this defense of this crap. Like, all these conversations are just a waste of time about these stupid, moronic interpretations. They're just like comparing Red Riding Hood to Goldilocks to the Three Blind Mice. Why are smart people wasting their time indulging in a conversation about which one of these garbage explanations of reality are right? They're garbage, all of them.
So again, I say DraftScience is wrong to heap such harsh criticism of physics.
They can't be too harshly criticized. They're such a sham. They're not just made a mistake like they put a brontosaurus head on a flaposaurus. Okay, they didn't make some simple little mistakes here. I mean, their mistakes are overt and right in your face. And they're engineered mistakes. Again, trying to compare water to photons and then doing it with radar when you don't even have the same physical impediment that the object goes through. These are, and they can't describe these simple experiments. You cover one of the slits and you get no pattern. These aren't little fucking mistakes. This is their foundational experiments, the experiments that they say whole of quantum mechanics is based on, and they can't even recite the history correctly, like the Young experiment, totally unremarkable in the context of Newton. Explain to me how Young was a remarkable experiment in the context of Newton doing it with his own hair. Explain to me how Young is a remarkable experiment in that context, especially when Young wasn't talking about the pattern inside the pattern. He was just doing bars. Explain to me how Young could possibly be a remarkable experiment when Newton did it 125 years earlier. How do you explain that? That they can't recite that history correctly? And it happens all over the place, every single instance of the Eddington experiment. Just complete garbage. Einstein's gimmick of photons are twice as affected by gravity than any other particle in the universe, for absolutely no good reason than it makes my math work. I mean, how are they not guilty of egregious crime? Egregious crimes in engineering the evidence, engineering the coincidences, you know, and that's all they are, right? It's an on-off pattern, the simplest pattern in the universe, and we're to not even imagine that it could possibly be coincidental, that there's some connection. Just coincidental. Again, not being able to recognize the difference between a wave and a phase. Never use the word phase as a concept. Always talk about wavelengths. Always focus not on period, not on phase, no, wavelength. It's engineered bullshit. And it's obviously engineered bullshit. If Susskind sits there and says something like anti-divergence, you're going to tell me that's not engineered rhetoric? Because he wants to avoid saying the word convergence, because then he's just going to be basically saying, well, yeah, it's like a vacuum cleaner. There's like a vacuum cleaner inside every material thing, and it just sucks space. Yeah, that's my theory. I mean, this is just horse shit. You talk about vector space. He uses the word vector when he doesn't really mean something pointing. Yeah. And although this isn't a deliberate effort to confuse,
to the extent of calling them outright deceivers and liars, in the sense that,
well, they are. So I'm just saying. I mean, I haven't done that in the past, but I'm getting more and more comfortable with the fact that that's absolutely what they have to be. All right, because they got so many. They lie about every fucking experiment that's been done. They lie. They don't tell the truth. They don't explain it accurately. And that's just, they're using false evidence. And then they'll say things like, this is the most proven theory in the history of mankind. We predicted that when you flip a coin, it'll come up either heads or tails. And it's always been true, and it always will be true, and it's the most perfect theory ever, that there's only two possibilities, and it'll be one of those two possibilities. I mean, it's that bad to say they predicted something. They haven't predicted a damn thing that is actually real. The only thing they ever predicted was finding one of their imaginary particles. Show me something in the real world they predicted that couldn't have been predicted by a sixth grader having the same amount of information. Show me this prediction of quantum mechanics.
Plenty top guys all wash their hands when pushed of those deceptions. They are all analogies to save the layman from the mathematics.
And it doesn't save them, though. That's the joke of it, right? It doesn't save them from the mathematics any. The stupid multiverses. How does many worlds save them from mathematics? I mean, that sounds pretty complicated. You got to figure out, okay, the wave function collapses, and that's a new dimension, and the new dimension though started at this location at this time, and so it can't interfere with anything that happened after that in any other dimension, but it's affected by it, but it has the same common history. I mean, how does that save them any of this math? How does turning it into a cartoon change how far Little Red Riding Hood has to ride? Okay. She didn't ride, right? So, or if I'm using the real example of Smucko walking down the sidewalk, I mean, how does the math any different between the cartoon and the reality?
Susskind is a breath of fresh air in trying to elevate the layperson away from those.
Oh, so just again, this guy has a little bit of a horny for mathematics, but I'm saying even if you have a horny for mathematics, I still can't see how Susskind enlightens you one single shreddy bit. Okay, it is all just convoluted mush, silly analogies. Well, it's like a plane of glass with water in it that's at a constant pressure, and blah blah blah. A silly metaphor for what gravity is supposed to be, because you can't do the mathematics for bent space any other way except to analogize it to basically a force from the outside. It always turns into that. He has to have a waterfall for the water to fall down as well. He always has to come up with some place for the energy to come from. But if he had to do that in the real universe, where would the waterfall be? I wonder.
Limited metaphors, as Richard Feynman would say. It's like a wave. Well, no, it's not exactly. It's like a particle. Well, no, it's... So
again, this is more just quote mining in a sense, but I can quote mine. So I'm just saying I played the Feynman clip, okay? He's basically saying that, no, the duality is bullshit. It's a corpuscle. He says it overtly, all right? He says, I wish people would just let go of this wave crap because it doesn't have anything to do with the reality. He says it. It's obviously his preference is to just say, forget dopey explanations. All right? It's beyond our understanding. I, the great Feynman, can't figure out. You have no hope. So just accept that there's probability in the universe and God does play dice with the universe. He says it. He says, well, yeah, you don't like that God plays dice with the universe. And then he looks right at the audience and says, tough! So, I mean, it's kind of clear that he's saying it. He's saying randomness is a function. That somehow there isn't a cause and effect here. That there's just some sort of magical random thing that creates probabilities.
No, not exactly, right? The problem with lay quantum physics is that too often...
So again, this bullshit that there's some problem with the listeners. There's not a problem with the teachers. No, this is all the problem of the teachers. The teachers have been full of shit for 100 fucking years. Just a glaring fact. Again, I've pointed it out. I've illustrated their lie after lie after lie after lie about the actual history and about the actual consequences of experiments and the actual integrity of experiments. Do I have to point this out again? So for well over 100 years, they've been talking about Michelson-Morley. And Michelson-Morley used a half-silvered mirror, as a beam splitter. And I pointed out, well, half-silvering means you create a bunch of tiny little apertures. So what's the consequence of doing that? Well, you answered the direct question asked to you. What do you think the consequence of having a half-silvered mirror is? Do you think you're going to have two equal beams? Is it realistic to think so? One beam is going to be diffracting, diverging through the entire 18 mirrors, while the other beam isn't going to be diffracting at all. Diverging at all through the 18 mirrors. Until the very last stage, it'll start being diverging. So that they're not equal beams. So isn't that a critical assumption in the experiment of what's causing the pattern? Yeah, it is a critical assumption in the experiment about how the patterns is caused. Do they even explain to you? Does anybody explain to you where the interference happens in the stupid experiment anyway? These are critical things. These are things mentioned in Einstein's papers. These are part of Maxwell's equations. All of this stuff is premised on these fucking experiments. And they have huge flaws in their understanding of them. They still don't have an explanation for the envelope in the two-slit experiment. Nothing. They say things like virtual photon. And you're sitting here pretending to me that it's the listener's fault. The layperson isn't getting it. No, with the layperson, if the layperson is wasting any of their time saying these guys deserve to be carefully listened to because they're careful and thoughtful and deliberate scientists. No, they're mathematicians, and that's all they are. And their math is useless. Their math just does what you could do with a fucking ruler. I can take a ruler to this two-slit pattern and I can figure out all this crap. Their math isn't doing anything miraculous. It's just a formulation of effects. And what a physicist should be after is a formalization of cause.
Each advocate of an interpretation leaves the lay physicist with a feeling or a choice to grab at a particular interpretation and say, that is what it is exactly like.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely nothing here in terms of choices. We don't have evolution versus Goldilocks, the Three Bear, Little Red Riding Hood, Jehovah, Mohammed. That would be an easy choice, right? No, these choices all suck. It's wacky theory, wackier theory, and wacky theory. Okay, all the interpretations are loop-de-doo bullshit. Okay, magitons with radar, multiverses, multiple history bullshit, and then the Feynman one of just forget about it. The universe is wacky. Nature's crazy. She's such a fucking, she's always playing with us, wiggling on our nutsack and shit. She's just a flirty whore. She won't let us know what she's up to. Bullshit. It's too complicated. The universe is way too complicated. When we know every bit of the universe looks stone cold brain dead. It's just a bunch of rocks banging into each other in the big universe. There's fucking craters. The moon is covered with little fucking holes. Jesus Christ, does that look complicated to you? Oh, there's something really complicated happening. No, it's not complicated. It's dirt fucking simple. It's dirt simple.
Himself on the shoulder and says, I've joined an elite minority who have understood quantum mechanics. Now, I say nobody has understood quantum mechanics.
Yeah, you can't understand what they can't draw a picture of. So obviously right there we sort of win in the sense that, bullshit. You don't have anything. If you can't draw a picture of it, you don't got anything. All right? You got nothing. It's just, it really is mechanical. So you either have invisible man and you say, well, I can't draw the invisible man. I don't know how to draw a gremlin.
Until you accept the disconnect between a reality-based theorem and a vector-space theorem.
And again, so he says vector spaces somehow has something to do with fucking reality. No, it's just a bunch of complex numbers that you know, if it's in Suskind's hands, I'm saying it's probably irrational, not rational.
And the inherent contradictions or oppositions therein. You see, to choose.
I have this sped up quite a bit, like 1.5, but you know, ooh. So to choose, right? To choose among bullshit, bullshit, and bullshit, and none of them have any coherency. None of them start from a position where this is how the universe works. They know they have two conflicting theories that aren't going to ever make any sense: bent space, magical geometry space. And somehow it moves exactly the same speed as this particle quantized energy thing. How come the quantized energy thing moves the same speed as the bent space thing, these two opposite mechanisms? They already have the evidence that they're on a wrong track. There's every evidence they're on a bridge to nowhere, and they won't get off of it.
An interpretation of quantum mechanics. You have to have inclinations as to what aspects of reality you're prepared to lose, or...
Yeah, exactly. You have to be an imbecile, basically. We have no evidence of this Alice in Wonderland world. There's no talking rabbits, there's no cards running around, there's no wacky hat people, there's none of this shit. No evidence of this shit at all. We have a universe just full of clunky things. We're clunky, everything's clunky, clunk, clunk, lots of clunky, hard bits, no magic anywhere. We have a few experiments where something a little bit wacky happens. Okay, the photons, ooh, they come out funny. Okay, and we get a little pattern in our interferometer, a little pattern. And all of a sudden we get bent out of shape and say, we have to create a whole wacky world to explain this. We have to bend the whole universe that looks pretty stupid and mechanical and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Very causey and effecty. And we have to break all of that just because of a couple of experiments. That's just idiotic.
Forget about or push to the side. I think probably the best interpretations do solve all the cliche problems with quantum mechanics, except the one of pure probability.
So again, I don't even know how he says they solve them at all, when they're so imprecise, and they don't really the math doesn't really predict actually what happens, actually what we see, and it has to be engineered to do that failure. So this is just more bullshit that some one of these stupid idiotic interpretations actually makes any fucking sense. They make no sense.
Take for example the cat being alive and dead in Schrodinger's equation.
Right. This is a complete waste of anybody's time. So why do you even indulge in this? So this is not. This is like a fable inside of a fable. This is like the book of fables that Little Red Riding Hood has in her thing, and she's reading it as she's walking. She's reading fables. That's what this is so stupid, because we know that if we put a movie camera or video camera in there, we know that the little piece of shit's going to go out and the poison's going to fall, and this isn't complicated at all. There's no mystery here. There's no reason to even speculate about, because we know if we did the experiment, it's not going to mean anything. We know what the outcome's going to be.
Well,
when we know this idiotic notion that somehow we need to observe the universe for it to act is just retarded. It's so human-centric and so ego-maniacally insane to think the universe is dependent on your consciousness observing something. It's just retarded. It's so fucking stupid.
That interpretations that incorporate decoherence as a concept, that the environment on a large macroscopic scale, on a coarse grain scale, is effectively measuring and making real the micro scale.
Yeah, there's more horse shit, as if it needs that. So just there's this whole idea that like the photon needs to hit something before it's heading somewhere. It's just, why would you even indulge in such an idiotic conversation? Why would you assume it? There's no real evidence that that's what's happening. You're just making up a story. It's a fable.
Look at the micro scale. You're on a fine-grained basis, upon which you're excluding the environment, and you are the sole observer, and therefore you don't have this decoherence. Take, for example, the it can be phrased a few different ways, but I'll call it the many histories interpretation, which I have on my channel being spoken about, or consistent histories, I think he calls it.
Yeah, and just a waste of time, because there's again, you either believe in cause and effect, or you're saying, no, I think things do wacky stuff, and so, I believe in ESP, and I believe I can predict the future. I just have to think about it for a little while, and I'll predict that, I'll have a fart in about 15 minutes. Go ahead, be an asshole. Just just drink some lead paint. Just make yourself dumber if you can fall for that kind of crap. You got magic powers that you can't prove you have.
Mary Gilman, about the anomaly of spooky action at distance. In the consistent distance theory, he can talk and discard that and say, they talk as though it does something.
Right, so now you're just demonstrating how the physicists are so inconsistent. They can't even get their stories straight. So one group of them is aggressively saying that there's real entanglement, and the other group is saying, no, it's kind of obvious that, yes, the photons are created as, left and right when they're pooped by the electron, and there's just nothing remarkable here, nothing to see here, and that's why we can't access it. That's why there's nothing to access. That's why there is no superluminal communication. There is no instantaneous understandings between photons, and so we can't use it to our advantage. The universe didn't make anything. No organism is taking advantage of this ability to instantaneously know what's happening halfway around the world or inside the bear cave, right? Wouldn't it be a great advantage to a biological organism to be able to see the bear in his cave, with entanglement knowledge? Clearly, there's no evidence that any of this crap could possibly be true.
But isn't the spooky action of the distance? He says, no, it's Bertelsmann socks. It was all fixed at the measurement. That measurement occurred on a history line.
Yeah, but they still are left.
That happened.
They're still talking as if everything's spooky action at a distance. Their explanation of gravity is spooky action at a distance. It's nothing. Their explanation of magnetism still spooky action at a distance. Their explanation of the two-slit experiment is still spooky action at a distance. They never get past keeping everything spooky because they don't want to do something rational, like say, well, what's the rational, reasonable, simple explanation for the effect? What's the simple cause? What's the simplest cause I can imagine? They don't seem to be bothered with doing that. What's the simplest cause I can imagine? That doesn't seem to be on the table anywhere with these loop-de-doos.
The outcome were, it had a chance of being the other way in the remote distance, but that never happened, he says. But what he doesn't tell, what's not entirely clear when he's discussing this, it is in other parts, and I don't know whether I've captured it in my video, is that
what's not entirely presented or stated is that the whole premise of this thing is thin and weak, that all the evidence is mush. Okay, they're relying on polarization filters. They don't even know how they work. They have no clue. It's just like the Michelson-Morley thing with the half-silvered mirror. They're just not paying any attention to the details of how their experiment even works. They just assume it does that. They assume two photons are at the same time emitted in with opposite character, as if they can even have that. Opposite polarizations. And they're using polarization film to separate and cause all this stuff to happen and do these stupid experiments, as if the polarization film doesn't actually influence the damn thing. Like it didn't already collapse whatever wave function there possibly was anyway, right? Which it seems clear is exactly what the film does. I mean, it's all made out of shit. The whole conversation is unnecessary because it's first about something that couldn't possibly matter. You're never going to access it, and you're never going to use it, and it's just a waste of time. It has nothing to do with real physics.
Is similar in regards, very similar features to the many worlds approach, in that the many worlds and the many histories all have an intrinsic probabilistic chance about them, and thus this is what I would call the best formulation.
Well, they say that whatever universe is going to be chosen is somehow random, but they have to assume that there's already all these universes to choose from. So that's been sort of just bogus. Is there, in a sense, it's not at all probabilistic that there's yes and no answers to questions, right, left, and the right has an implication, left has an implication. So in a sense, that's not breaking cause and effect. But the idea that you have roads to different universes, that's breaking logical reasoning skill.
Still leaves us with the brute problem of intrinsic probability. And we can't accept intrinsic probability as philosophically viable.
It's not a philosophical question. It's a question of what reason do we have to believe? And there's absolutely no reason to believe. These are fables, fairy tales, stories. You can't just say the universe has some faculty, okay, that first you can't demonstrate to exist in any real sense. I mean, you have an experiment, but obviously the experiments don't even match in terms of, in one experiment the photons aren't wave functions, in the other experiment they have to be. In one experiment single photons do the behavior, in the other experiment it has to be 2 photons. I mean, there's no continuity here.
I think it may well be the best we can do. All I ask of people is to accept that it's not philosophically viable and in itself does not demolish reality.
And in itself does not demolish reality. I just mean that if you're going to accept the existence of any homunculus, you might as well accept the existence of all the homunculuses. So once you accept one invisible man, you might as well just turn the whole universe into invisible men. In spite of the fact there's absolutely no evidence of their existence, beyond some grandmother saying, "The gremlins done it."
I think that about does it. The next video, I added, while I've been thinking about it, some more paragraphs to the abstract or introduction to a paper I'm writing, in which I discuss a way of considering electron spin as a dynamic property rather than a set theoretic property.
Meaning, in a sense, dynamic, in a sense, would fit into my critique. But anyway, this whole electron spin thing is all just more fake words. They don't know what the actual property is, and the property really has to do with how much energy the electron, what kind of state it's in, energy-wise, how pushable it is. And the problem with this whole nonsense is the only way they detect these things is to push electrons into experiments. They can't have the electron just sit somewhere and then turn on the juice. They have to introduce it. So it's like the prisoner seeing the electric chair before you get him into it. He's probably not going to behave exactly the same way as if you blindfolded him, let's say. So I'm just saying it's just sort of bullshit to say electrons, you can know their state and then slide them into an experiment and you haven't changed their state. Yeah, I think you have.
Whereas a spinning ball essentially defines an axis, so does a wobbling spinning ball, what we call a precessing spinning ball. In a sense, you have 2 rotations defining 2 separate axes. The dynamics of that and the treating of certain principles of measurement applied to that system yields the same quantum probabilities and is entirely born out of a classical picture.
Yeah, well, whatever. I say it's obscure at best and useless. Yeah. So go ahead, but I don't. It's already made of nonsense, and so you're going to try to add some more nonsense to make the nonsense less nonsensy. But I don't see any point.
It asks you to accept a rule in the sense that Newton admits and in the sense that Newton admits that in his law of gravity there is no mechanism, in the proposition of this rule, I too can give no mechanism.
He just admits he doesn't know the mechanism, so let's just understand. And that was 350 years ago, and that was, you know, in a world where we didn't have half, a quarter, a tenth of the information we have now. So we should be making a lot better approximations about causes and effects with the amount of information and data we have. And instead, people are glued to these phantasmagorically fancy and elaborate and complex explanations for things we have to understand to be elemental and stupid and simple.
I can suggest lots. It's not too hard. But it's not an important feature in that sense, because it's actually trivially easy to say that's what's done, and you retain physicality rather than magic. It might be unpalatable and unlike physicality, but it is physical nonetheless. The idea of an operator updating systems, quantum mechanics has this. I retain the notion of an operator in the measurement process.
So more bullshit rhetoric, in my opinion. I mean, using words like operator when the environment is not an operator. So it's just kind of bullshit to call it something that has some sort of interest in the outcome when it doesn't. It's just a mechanical process, like when you take the layers off the glass, you're affecting the glass. The glass is a transmission medium. It has to have very regular geometry inside of it to transmit light accurately. Obviously, one surface knows what's happening to the other surface. I think it's the obvious answer to the question of how the phenomenon takes place. You know, not that complicated. It's a stack of magnets. You know, if I had a stack of magnets, little magnets, I stacked them on top of each other and I pushed all the stacks together, they'd all have to align on their magnetic dipoles. So they would all have to stagger in connecting to each other. And the same thing is happening in the geometry of something like a transparent medium. It has to have a very regular and disciplined geometry. So when you start fucking with one surface, and just like magnets, if I start flattening one surface, it's going to resist. And so if I knock a magnet off one row, that row will change in its relationship to the other rows.
Now, how an operator is manifest in reality? Well, for starters, it's best to recognise that an operator, which is just a in mathematics terms, is just a matrix multiplied against the state in the system. Now, since this is computable, right? I think this is the number file videos which show computing logic gates with falling dominoes are also number file videos on or computer file videos.
Yeah. Let's have some more elaborate mathematics to do flipping a coin, and then say you're doing something useful. Oh, I create a formula that figures out exactly the probability because of the flick, you know, the flick nature. So there's a little bit of force and it flicks a little bit of angle. I can give you a few of the aerodynamics. Who is that useful to? Except an idiot. A lunatic? Psycho killers? I mean, who could care?
On Turing machines and encryption technologies.
Yeah, all things that they haven't got a clue on also. So just keep pretending.
Mechanical computations, gears, pulleys, etc. Right? All that. If I show you a computation, then it can be achieved probably in an infinite number of ways mechanically. Yeah.
No, I don't think it can in an infinite number of ways. I think that's just more hyperbole and bullshit. So, no. And again, show me a calculation. Again, you're showing me a formula. A formula is just recognizing, well, there might be 25 variables, but only 7 of them are important. And so let's take the 7 and put them in a formula, and we can predict outcomes, because we already know what the outcomes are going to be. That's how we wrote the formula, is watching it. So this, again, just this pretense that formulas do cause. Formulas don't do cause. They do effect. And if you're watching experiments affect, you don't need a formula for it. You already saw it. Why do I need a formula for it?
And ways perhaps that we can't imagine. Yeah. Do I commit the policy? Charge Suskin Golf? Maybe. So
I clearly, in my opinion, you create the offense of giving, even indulging in this phantasmagorical conversations, wasting time having the conversation about the viability of Red Riding Hood as a theory. It doesn't have any. It shouldn't even be introduced into our vernacular. It's such a bad guess. So why don't we sit there and just say, let's go back to the guessing board, because these are really bad guesses, overtly bad, and the fact that you're wasting time considering them, in my opinion, is bad on you.
Limitations on that thought, the limitations of human mind. I think by definition, what I mean to say is that
none of them are based on a ton of evidence. If there was some evidence, if we really did just find a bunch of random red hoods laying around, well, there might be some reason to do this. But there isn't any. Again, the only evidence is in their fake evidence, in their fake story about the Young experiment, in their incomplete and wrong explanation of exactly what happens when you do the experiment, of their making up crap where they actually put detectors on the experiment when they never did the detector experiment. So why are we playing this game as if there's some credible reason to walk down this rabbit hole? There's absolutely no credible reason to sit there and indulge in, oh, let's see if we can walk into a mirror. Let's see if we can do it. Fall into mirrors. There's no reason to think it can happen.
Terms of reference can never. You can't use reality to prove reality. That will always be a fact. So there will always philosophical.
I don't even know what that means. It's so silly. I mean, obviously we're gaining a ton of material evidence, and one group of facts proves other groups of facts, verifies, all that kind of stuff. They all point higher and higher, more detail. So that's just just more cliche rubbish.
Because of the nature of the recursion, the circular arguments involved, there will always be a lack of understanding in the end.
Yeah, so just nonsense, right? Do you actually believe that? Do you actually believe the universe is too complicated for us to figure it out? Do you actually believe that this mechanical process can't be narrowed down more and more and more just by doing more experiments and doing more careful analysis and coming up with better suggestions than wacky multiverses and all this other mush? The fact is they all want to do, they're all lost in Wonderland. They've lost all perspective. They don't even know what a regular person is anymore. They don't know what a rock is, or dirt, or trees. They've lost all connection to a physical world because they're lost in their magical, endless, infinitely bullshitty mathematical world.
The question is philosophically whether you end up in a situation which could be more akin and correctly labelled as magic, or in a situation which is yes, we still have physicality.
That's all they have is magic. Bent space is magic. Virtual photons is magic. The two-slit experiment is photons turning into wavicles. It's all magic.
But we've reached the limitations that reality imposes on us. Yeah, definitely done that.
So, yeah, again, I'll just argue 99.9999999% of the observed reality, the facts we've gleaned, point to crude mechanics, not sophisticated mechanics. Crude. Now, some of the images, some of the Rube Goldberg mechanisms can create rainbows, and they can create, but we know that the rainbow is just a mechanical process. It's not magic. It's not Wonderland. It's just a process. Step A, step B, step C, step D. That's it. Nothing magical in it. Real simple when you diagram it. That's what 99% of the evidence points to. And there's only a couple of experiments where we go, wow, that is fucked up. and that's it. Just tiny little ones, and they don't even say it's fucked up. They just say, yeah, I don't know too much about the interaction between matter and photons on a surface. You know, I mean, I understand this going into the surface this way. You know, that's kind of, yeah, that always bends things. I wonder if you go this way through the surface, whether you also get bent. Durr.
So, I'll extend a little to the comment on my last video in Quinty Guro about imagining dimensions.
Another completely useless function. We know there's 3 dimensions. Forward, back, left, right, up, down. There's no room for anything else. Why are we indulging in the conversation? Where's the evidence that we need another dimension, that there's some other dimension influencing this world? Where do we have real hard evidence that everything isn't doing up, down, left, right, or forward, back? Where's there evidence of some other thing happening? And that somehow magically this forward, back stuff is getting ruined by something coming from some other place? The time dimension is just absolute nonsense because it's just a function. There's no way to imagine it because time isn't a dimension. It's not a physical, doesn't have a vector. It's just bullshit to think, the time dimension. Where is it affecting anything in the universe? Is things blipping out of existence? Do things pop back into their history? Do I all of a sudden, become 21 years old? No, none of this shit's happening. So why are you believing in it? Why are you believing in something for which there's absolutely not even shreds of evidence? I mean, any conversation about extra dimensions is just bullshit. That's, again, just mathematics whacking off. That has nothing to do with reality.
It was brought to my attention before I saw such videos in my mathematics class that you had to be wary when talking about objects existing and the analysis therein, because in my dissertation I was talking about higher dimension circles, for want of a better word. I think I forgot that term here, terminology.
Spheres, I think, is the word you're looking for, but whatever. So he's playing this game, like Susskind says it, this idiotic notion that somehow even when you imagine 2 dimensions, you're imagining them in 3 dimensions. So what? I clearly understand when I see this piece of paper in 3 dimensions that the paper is 2-dimensional, that I can't go into the paper and I can't, in any way interact with the thin dimension. So it's 2-dimensional, even though I'm looking at it in 3-dimensional. I'm perfectly coherently understanding its 2-dimensionalness. So the fact that we can look at things in 3 dimensions, which we're not even doing realistically, right? I mean, it's a trick of our eyes, and imagine things of lesser dimension. That's easy. What's the problem? No problem doing that. It doesn't break our understanding. Looking at 2 dimensions with 3-dimensional eyes does not mean you can't see the 2 dimensions. So it's just a more rubbish, more gibberish, just more words pretending there's a problem where there's no problem.
So S1 would be the circle. S2 subscript would be sphere. S subscript 3 would be the donut. Okay. Now, to the extent that you talk about and imagine these mathematical objects, you're picturing them always in a 3D space.
Yeah, totally unremarkable. Once again, there's lots of 2-dimensional objects in 3 dimensions. Frisbees, all kinds of things. The two-dimensionality of a galaxy, even, or something. I can perfectly understand it. I can perfectly understand its 2-dimensionalness looking at it in 3 dimensions. It doesn't hurt my ability to comprehend.
I think that's what it means to picture something, is to have the picture in a 3D space. It is actually and meaningless concept to picture it within the 2D space.
You can't picture it in a space you can't exist in. So again, it's just idiotic for us to sit there and say, I'm going to imagine being two-dimensional, because I'd have to cut one of my dimensions off. And how do I do that? How do I imagine not having one of those dimensions? That's impossible.
There are analogies about flatland and imagining the nature of a 3D object passing through flatland.
It's just more nonsense. So, just there's no point in trying to imagine it. It doesn't happen anywhere in reality. There is no reality. There is no two-dimensional reality. There is no one-dimensional reality. All this crap doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have anything to do with anything that's called evidence. There's no reason to indulge in the conversation. Clearly, the universe exists as a volume, and a volume has 3 dimensions. So we're done. There's nothing else. There's nothing to talk about. That's something that has distance and it doesn't care which way you go. That's 3 dimensions.
Just see the edges. But again, that is not a full. That is an attempt to convey a point through an analogy. When you see those edges passing through flatland, you're again seeing. You're not seeing what it's like to live in flatland.
Well, regardless, I can't see any of it, and the only way you could see it is somebody simulate it, and they can't simulate it because it can't be done. So what's the point? This is just such a waste of time. Conversations about these completely made up notions of extra dimensions. No reason to believe in them at all. No evidence. They're just God. They're just invisible men. It's just making up fake things as explanations. It's just like saying humans must have a homunculus in them that's making all the wheels turn. It's a stupid, immature, primitive. It's the kind of mistake a primitive makes.
There are no images of what it's like to be in flatland. You're seeing the plane in 3D space, of which you get to see the restrictions in dimensional information as one-dimensional.
Yeah. Well, frankly, again, if you take away one of my dimensions, I don't have any dimensions. Frankly, you either make me infinitely thin, or you make me infinitely short, or you make me infinitely thin this way. I don't exist.
Lines passing through on the plane, and it's through that restriction you're supposed to garner an intuition about limitations, restrictions on dimensionality. It's not actually an argument one way or the other for more or less dimensions, but it's just a bunch of jerking off. Frankly, it's just useless conversation. And again, if you just think about what you're saying for a minute, the fact that I look at 2 dimensions with 3-dimensional eyes, binocular vision, doesn't mean I can't see the 2-dimensionalness. It doesn't mean it's not obvious. I don't look at a comic strip and see how I can fall into it. Sole plausibility as to there can be hidden dimensions.
It's not an issue of can be, right? There can be an invisible man. We could say that, right? There can be homunculuses. There can be gremlins. There can be fairy pixies. It could be anything. You can make up anything. You can just sit around, like little girls and have little conversations about, well, what if we were 1,000 feet tall, but our shoes were still really small? Well, it'd be really hard to walk because we'd constantly be tipping over. So we have to have really big feet. Maybe. I mean, you can make up anything and have a conversation about it, but that's all this sounds like. You're just saying this is high-minded physics? This is physics going someplace? No, this is garbage.
It's a compelling argument.
No, there's no compelling anything in this. It is just such a wank. It is such a waste of fucking brain space to waste any time at all playing with this stupid notion that there's some inaccessible place in the universe that's making two slit patterns happening. Yeah, it doesn't put craters on the moon. It doesn't make the Earth go around the sun. No, it just makes little funny patterns on two slit experiments. I mean, this is stupid.
There being other places that can be, which we don't have access to. But
oh yeah, there can be. Again, just to say they can be, like I said, what is the point when these are completely immune explanations of reality, right? There's just no way for me to disprove your invisible man doesn't exist, right? I can't prove the invisible man doesn't exist, but there's absolutely no good reason to believe invisible men are fucking with us. No reason at all. None. No physicist should waste any time on invisible man theory. And extra dimensions are just as credible. They're just as weakly evidenced as invisible man theory.
From an abstract point of view, that's the end. I feel my stomach churning with hunger.
Yeah, mine's turning with something else. Just so revolting that this is what people waste their time on. This is supposed to be some sort of intelligent conversation about, well, who do you think would be better in bed, Little Red Riding Hood or Goldilocks? Oh, wait a minute, those are little girls. I'll be arrested for pedophilia and such. This is fucking moronic, and it's just so fucking depressing that this is... So, oh, yes, this is what intelligent people do. Fuck no. I don't even know, like I said, there's some reason why you think this is intriguing. Conversations about entanglement and extra dimensions and multiple histories. Why don't you do a video on the fucking holographic universe? Why don't you do a video on how information is stored on the outside of the black hole? Ooh. Just made up crap. Shit. Goodbye. Anyway. So it wasn't as good as the first video, but it'll have to do. Yeah, the second time around I just can't feign surprise. So I kind of knew, oh, he's just going to drone on about some fucking bullshit that couldn't possibly matter to any rational person on Earth. Anyway, if there were, more than one rational people on Earth. Apparently not. Sad to say. So, till next time, such.